In the grandeur of Mughal India, amid emperors and wars, flourished the quiet, profound influence of Sufi mystics. Sufism, the mystical dimension of Islam, had long been a force that transcended social and religious divides, emphasizing inner purity, divine love, and human unity. By the late 16th and early 17th centuries, Mughal courts were not only centers of power, but also of spiritual discourse. Emperors like Akbar had dabbled in religious eclecticism, and his successors maintained relationships with holy men. It was in this milieu that two remarkable Sufi saints, Hazrat Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah Badakhshi, rose to prominence. Their lives unfolded as continuous narratives intertwined with the Mughal dynasty's history, from Emperor Jahangir's visits to ascetics to Prince Dara Shikoh's spiritual quests. Both saints belonged to the Qādirī Sufi order and became legendary for their piety, wisdom, and the impact they left on disciples and royalty alike. This narrative recounts the lives of Miyan Mir and his disciple successor Mullah Shah in a flowing historical account. It traces Miyan Mir's early years in Sindh and his spiritual journey to Lahore, and Mullah Shah's path from distant Badakhshan to the same city. Their disciples, including members of the Mughal royal family, further extended their influence. Their spiritual teachings, their mystical practices, the philosophy of the unity of existence, and their contributions to Sufi thought form a crucial part of their story. And their influence in the Mughal court, from interactions with Emperors Jahangir and Shah Jahan to their spiritual mentorship of Prince Dara Shikoh and Princess Jahanara Begum, demonstrates how mysticism and power were often intertwined in Mughal-era India. Early life of Miyan Mir, from Sindh to the City of Saints. Miyan Mir, born around 1550, hailed from Thatta in Sindh, present-day Pakistan. His birth name was Mir Muhammad Mu'ayyinul Islam, and he came from a lineage tracing back to the second Muslim caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab. From an early age he showed an inclination towards spirituality, beyond formal scholarship. He became affiliated with the Qādirī order of Sufism, founded by the 12th century Saint Abdul Qadir Jilani of Baghdad. In his mid-20s, Miyan Mir migrated to Lahore, around 1575. Lahore, then a thriving Mughal capital, was home to poets, intellectuals, and Sufi lodges. The city, known as Data-ki-Nagri, City of the Saint, was a haven for spiritual seekers. Miyan Mir chose to settle on the outskirts of Lahore, dedicating himself to rigorous spiritual practice. Donning the garb of a fakir, an ascetic dervish, he lived in humble surroundings. As he guided those who came to him with advice grounded in faith and compassion, his reputation grew. Miyan Mir avoided material wealth, keeping only what was necessary for survival, giving away unsolicited offerings to the poor. Such behavior demonstrated that renunciation, zuhd, for him, did not mean neglecting the needy. Rather, true detachment required actively caring for others. His growing circle of followers, commoners and nobles alike, recognized him as a beacon of spiritual wisdom. A life of piety and trials. Miyan Mir's fame spread in Lahore, attracting many seekers. However, he remained wary of the ambitions of those who sought his blessings for personal gain. He instructed his close disciples to bar worldly-minded visitors from disturbing his peace. Despite his humility, tales of his spiritual power spread. One story tells of a wealthy man who offered Miyan Mir a pile of gold coins, hoping for divine favor. Instead of keeping the money, Miyan Mir promptly distributed it to the poor. When the benefactor returned and saw nothing left, he was baffled. Miyan Mir explained that as a dervish, he had no use for excess wealth. His role was to channel the charity to those who needed it. Miyan Mir's piety was further refined by introspection and guidance from earlier Sufi masters. Some traditions suggest he spent time at Ut Sharif, a famed Sufi center in Punjab, before emerging as an independent master. By the early 17th century, Miyan Mir's Khanqa, Sufi lodge, in Lahore, had become a beacon for seekers of truth. His daily routine involved dawn prayers, dhikr, remembrance of God, Quranic recitation, and heartfelt counsel to visitors. Miyan Mir emphasized inner sincerity over outward show. A saying attributed to him asserts that a perfect Sufi is one who has erased all sense of ego and makes no distinction between a stone and a jewel, viewing material objects, whether lowly or precious, with equal detachment. This wisdom molded the ethos of his circle. the saint and the emperor, Miyan Mir's encounters with Jahangir. Miyan Mir's renown eventually reached Emperor Jahangir, r. 1605 to 1627, who was known for his interest in holy men. Jahangir, the son of Akbar, was not as syncretic as his father but venerated pirs, saints, and often visited their shrines. Their meeting has become legendary. Jahangir decided to pay homage to Miyan Mir at the saint's humble abode in Lahore. Arriving with full imperial pomp, soldiers, courtiers and attendants, the emperor expected an immediate audience. However, Miyan Mir's disciples, following their master's instructions, stopped Jahangir at the gate. They asked him to wait outside until Miyan Mir granted permission. Accustomed to instant access and grand welcomes, the emperor was momentarily angered. But he restrained himself and waited. When he was finally admitted, he addressed Miyan Mir with a Persian couplet. At the door of a dervish there should be no gatekeeper. Miyan Mir replied with piercing wisdom, "They are there so that the dogs of the world may not enter." Jahangir understood the rebuke. The dogs of the world referred to greed and self-serving ambition. The emperor, chastened, folded his hands and apologized. This moment showcased the spiritual authority of the Sufi saint over temporal power. During the meeting, a poor man placed a single rupee before Miyan Mir. In keeping with his practice of immediate charity, Miyan Mir instructed the rupee to be given to the poorest person present. The man offered it to every dervish in the gathering, but each refused. They had no need for wealth. Finally, he returned, saying, "None of the dervishes will accept the rupee." Miyan Mir then turned to Jahangir and said, "Give it to him. He is the poorest and most needy of all." Jahangir was astonished. Miyan Mir explained, "This man already controls a vast kingdom, yet he covets the Deccan. His hunger is like a fire. The more fuel you add, the more it burns. His greed makes him the neediest of men." The emperor, who had come seeking blessings for conquest, left with a profound lesson on humility. This celebrated anecdote exemplifies how Sufi saints, even in an era dominated by powerful monarchs, wielded moral and spiritual authority over emperors. It also set the precedent for how Miyan Mir would deal with other royals, with polite distance and uncompromising honesty. He did not seek imperial favor or gifts and never visited the Mughal court. A bridge between faiths, Miyan Mir and the Sikh gurus. Aside from his interactions with Mughal rulers, Miyan Mir is also revered in Sikh history for his friendship with Guru Arjan Dev, the fifth Sikh guru. Their relationship, rooted in mutual respect, became a symbol of Hindu-Muslim or Sikh-Muslim harmony. According to Sikh tradition, Guru Arjan invited Miyan Mir to lay the foundation stone of the Golden Temple in Amritsar in 1588. This was a deeply symbolic gesture. The Guru saw no religious divide in who could sanctify a Sikh place of worship. Miyan Mir, in turn, honored the invitation. The four doors of the Golden Temple, open in all directions, signified inclusivity, and Miyan Mir's role in its foundation reinforced this ethos. When Guru Arjan was later imprisoned and executed by Jahangir in 1606, it is said that Miyan Mir, devastated by the injustice, visited the Guru in prison. He reportedly offered to intervene, but Guru Arjan accepted his fate as God's will. This moment cemented Miyan Mir's reputation as a friend of the Sikhs and an advocate of unity beyond religious divisions. His friendship continued with Guru Har Gobind, the sixth Sikh guru. Even today, Sikh visitors come to pay respects at Miyan Mir's shrine in Lahore, a testament to the legacy of interfaith harmony that he embodied. Final years and passing of Miyan Mir. By the 1630s, Miyan Mir was in his 80s, having spent over 60 years in Lahore. Despite his age, he remained devoted to his spiritual practices. It was during these later years that Prince Dara Shikoh, the eldest son of Emperor Shah Jahan, came under his influence. Dara, a seeker of mystical wisdom, had been drawn to Miyan Mir from an early age and considered him a spiritual guide. However, Miyan Mir was already advanced in years, so while Dara respected him as a master, he would later find direct guidance under Miyan Mir's disciple and spiritual successor, Mullah Shah Badakhshi. In August 1635, Miyan Mir fell ill. Surrounded by his disciples, he prepared for his final journey, the Visal, union with the divine, that Sufis see as the culmination of their earthly existence. On 11 August 1635, Miyan Mir passed away at the age of 84 or 85. The city of Lahore went into mourning. His funeral drew crowds from all walks of life, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, who came to pay homage to the great saint. Prince Dara Shikoh himself delivered the funeral oration, khutbah, for Miyan Mir, a rare honor that showed the deep reverence the Mughal prince held for the Sufi. In his eulogy, Dara declared Miyan Mir a pillar of righteousness and a luminous guide of divine wisdom. His presence at the funeral further signified that Miyan Mir's spiritual legacy would live on in the royal family. Miyan Mir was buried just outside Lahore in Alamganj, near where he had lived for decades. His simple grave soon became a place of pilgrimage. As his fame endured, a grand shrine was built over his tomb. This was likely commissioned by Dara Shikoh, who, as the governor of Punjab in the late 1630s, ensured that the tomb was a fitting monument for his spiritual guide. The structure featured a green dome, an elegant prayer hall, and intricate calligraphic inscriptions celebrating Miyan Mir's virtues. Over time, an adjacent mosque and a Sufi hospice were established, further solidifying Miyan Mir's status as one of Lahore's most venerated saints. His spiritual successor was Mullah Shah Badakhshi, his most accomplished disciple. With Miyan Mir's passing, leadership of the Qādirī order in Lahore transitioned to Mullah Shah, though the latter often resided in Kashmir. Under Mullah Shah's guidance, the Qādirī tradition continued to flourish, and its influence extended into the Mughal royal family through Dara Shikoh and Jahanara Begum. Mullah Shah Badakhshi, the disciple from the Afghani highlands, early life and spiritual quest. Mullah Shah was born in 1582 in Badakhshan, a region spanning present-day Afghanistan and Tajikistan. His birth name was Shah Muhammad, and he came from a learned family. His father was a Qazi, Islamic judge, in a village called Araska. From a young age, Shah Muhammad was steeped in Islamic scholarship, mastering the Quran, Hadith, and jurisprudence. However, he was drawn to Sufism, yearning for direct experience of the divine rather than mere legal knowledge. Determined to find a spiritual master, Shah Muhammad travelled extensively. He spent time in Balkh, now in Afghanistan, a historic city known for its Sufi heritage, and later in Kashmir, where he spent 3 years in seclusion, meditating and practicing ascetic disciplines. Despite these efforts, he had yet to find a guide who could take him to the highest levels of spiritual realization. His quest eventually led him southward into Mughal India. Around the late 1620s, after years of wandering, he heard of Miyan Mir, the legendary Qādirī saint of Lahore. Drawn by the master's reputation, Shah Muhammad travelled to Lahore, hoping to become his disciple, meeting Miyan Mir and spiritual transformation. When Mullah Shah arrived at Miyan Mir's Khanqa in Lahore, he was eager to pledge allegiance. However, Miyan Mir did not immediately accept him as a disciple. In keeping with the Sufi tradition of testing a seeker's sincerity, Miyan Mir observed him from a distance before granting him initiation. Determined to prove his dedication, Mullah Shah subjected himself to extreme austerities. It is said that he gave up sleep entirely, spending nights in continuous prayer and meditation. His devotion was so intense that he reached a point where he could remain awake for extended periods without fatigue. These ascetic feats impressed Miyan Mir, who finally accepted him as a murid, disciple, and began his training. Under Miyan Mir's guidance, Mullah Shah progressed rapidly. He learned the principles of fana, annihilation of the ego, and baqa, subsistence in God. He also deepened his understanding of the unity of existence, wahdat al-wujud, the mystical philosophy that sees all creation as a manifestation of the divine. Over time, Miyan Mir conferred khilafat, spiritual succession, upon Mullah Shah, effectively making him his deputy and heir. Miyan Mir affectionately gave him the title Mullah Shah, and among his followers he became known as Hazrat Akhund. With this designation, Mullah Shah emerged as one of the leading Sufi figures in Mughal India, retreat to Kashmir and spiritual mastery. After Miyan Mir's passing in 1635, Mullah Shah chose to retreat to Kashmir. There, he lived in solitude, meditating in the serene valleys of Srinagar. Kashmir, with its rich Sufi heritage, provided an ideal environment for spiritual reflection. Mullah Shah's presence in the region soon attracted seekers, and his reputation grew. He lived in a narrow cell, embracing a life of ascetic simplicity. During this time, he became known for his mystical states, experiencing deep spiritual ecstasies and visions of the Prophet Muhammad and other saints. As his fame spread, Prince Dara Shikoh learned of him. Having lost Miyan Mir, Dara sought a new spiritual guide and travelled to Kashmir in 1637 to meet Mullah Shah. This encounter would shape the prince's spiritual philosophy and ultimately influence the Mughal court. Dara Shikoh and Mullah Shah, the Sufi prince and his guide, Dara Shikoh's initiation into the Qādirī order. Prince Dara Shikoh, the eldest son of Shah Jahan, was known for his deep interest in Sufism, comparative religion, and mysticism. From a young age, he had revered Miyan Mir. Now he sought Mullah Shah's guidance. When Dara first approached Mullah Shah, the Sufi master did not immediately accept him as a disciple. He wanted to ensure that Dara's interest in Sufism was genuine and not merely a prince's indulgence. The Mughal prince, however, persisted in his request, showing great humility. After repeated visits, Mullah Shah finally agreed and initiated Dara into the Qādirī order around 1640. Following his initiation, Dara immersed himself in intensive Sufi practices. He undertook chilla, 40-day spiritual retreats, engaged in deep meditation, and studied mystical texts. Mullah Shah guided him through the stages of self-purification, helping him grasp profound metaphysical concepts. Under Mullah Shah's influence, Dara became convinced that all religions shared a common mystical essence. This led him to explore Hindu spiritual traditions, culminating in his Persian translation of the Upanishads, Siri Akbar, The Great Secret. Mullah Shah encouraged Dara's intellectual pursuits, providing him with a framework for integrating diverse spiritual teachings. Jahanara Begum's devotion to Mullah Shah. Dara's sister Jahanara Begum also became a disciple of Mullah Shah. A highly educated and influential princess, she sought spiritual guidance and, like Dara, underwent Sufi training under Mullah Shah. She wrote a biography of him, Risala-i-Sahibiyya, where she described her experiences and mystical revelations under his mentorship. Through Dara and Jahanara, Mullah Shah's teachings reached the Mughal court. While Shah Jahan tolerated their Sufi inclinations, their brother Aurangzeb, a strict orthodox ruler, viewed their ideas as heretical. The trials of Mullah Shah, faith under persecution, Dara Shikoh's downfall and Mullah Shah's vulnerability. As Mullah Shah continued his spiritual teachings in Kashmir, the Mughal Empire was undergoing a political transformation. Emperor Shah Jahan, once a patron of the arts and mysticism, fell seriously ill in 1657, triggering a brutal war of succession among his sons. Dara Shikoh, the heir apparent and Mullah Shah's most devoted disciple, faced fierce opposition from his younger brother Aurangzeb, who sought to establish a more orthodox Islamic rule. Dara's commitment to Sufism, his fascination with Hindu philosophy, and his open-minded approach to spirituality made him an object of suspicion among the empire's conservative elements. His translations of the Upanishads and his philosophical work, Majma'-ul-Bahrain, The Confluence of Two Oceans, which sought to bridge Islamic and Hindu mystical thought, were perceived as heretical by orthodox scholars. To them, Dara was not merely a Sufi prince, but a dangerous innovator who blurred religious boundaries. When Aurangzeb defeated Dara Shikoh in battle in 1658 and seized the throne, the fate of Mullah Shah and the Qādirī Sufi network became precarious. Since Mullah Shah was Dara's spiritual guide, he too came under scrutiny. Aurangzeb's crackdown on Sufism, unlike his predecessors, Aurangzeb sought to impose a stricter interpretation of Islam and viewed Sufism, especially its more esoteric elements, with suspicion. Mullah Shah's teachings on Wadat al-Wujud, unity of being, which emphasized the idea that all existence is a manifestation of God, were deemed heretical by the orthodox ulema. Some of his poetic verses, in which he described the dissolution of the self into the divine, were particularly controversial. Aurangzeb, now emperor, issued orders to suppress unorthodox Sufi teachings. Mullah Shah, who had lived in relative peace under Shah Jahan's rule, suddenly found himself targeted. Local governors in Kashmir, seeking to align themselves with the new emperor's policies, saw Mullah Shah as a potential threat due to his association with Dara Shikoh. By 1660, reports emerged that Mullah Shah had been arrested on charges of heresy. Some sources suggest that he was brought before Mughal officials, where he was interrogated about his beliefs. He was accused of propagating doctrines that were contrary to Orthodox Islam, particularly his interpretations of divine unity. There was even a period when Mullah Shah faced the possibility of execution. However, it was Princess Jahanara Begum, still influential at court despite her brother Dara's fall, who intervened on his behalf. Jahanara, who had once written a treatise on Mullah Shah's spiritual teachings, pleaded with Aurangzeb to spare the saint's life. Given her position in the imperial family, Aurangzeb relented but imposed restrictions. Mullah Shah was forbidden from teaching publicly and was placed under effective house arrest, the final years and death of Mullah Shah. After his release, Mullah Shah left Kashmir and returned to Lahore, possibly sensing that his time was near. He withdrew further from public life, spending his remaining days in contemplation. His health declined, and by 1661 he passed away. Mullah Shah was buried beside his master, Miyan Mir, in Lahore. His tomb was constructed near Mian Mir's shrine, marking their lifelong spiritual bond. While his death was largely ignored by the new political order under Aurangzeb, his followers continued to venerate him. Jahanara Begum, despite the challenges of the time, ensured that Mullah Shah's tomb and shrine were built in proper Mughal style. The shrine's garden layout reflected the grandeur of Mughal architecture, yet maintained the simplicity of a Sufi resting place. Even though Aurangzeb had distanced himself from such figures, the memory of Mullah Shah lived on through his disciples and the writings he left behind. The legacy of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah, the shrines of Lahore, centers of devotion. Even after their passing, Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah's shrines in Lahore became major pilgrimage sites. The tomb of Miyan Mir, constructed with the patronage of Dara Shikoh, became an important center of Qādirī Sufism. His annual Urs, death anniversary, continued to be celebrated, drawing thousands of devotees from all religious backgrounds. To this day, his shrine in Lahore remains a place of peace and spiritual solace, attracting Muslims, Sikhs, and Hindus alike. Mullah Shah's tomb, situated near Miyan Mir's, also became a site of reverence, although it did not receive the same level of patronage due to Aurangzeb's rule. Nonetheless, for those who followed the Qādirī path, Mullah Shah was remembered as the teacher who shaped the spiritual vision of Dara Shikoh and Jahanara Begum. The influence on later Sufi traditions. Though the political tide had turned against Dara's vision, the philosophy of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah influenced generations of Sufis. The Qādirī order continued to flourish in Punjab and Kashmir, adapting to the new socio-political realities. Some of Mullah Shah's disciples kept his teachings alive, though often in secret due to Aurangzeb's puritanical policies. One of the most notable spiritual descendants of this tradition was Mullah Shah, 1680 to 1757, the great Punjabi Sufi poet. Mullah Shah's verses, which championed love over orthodoxy, unity over division, and the idea of finding God within oneself, echoed the themes that Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah had taught. The Qādirī influence in Punjab, particularly in Sufi poetry and mysticism, can be traced back to their teachings. Dara Shikoh's intellectual legacy. Though Dara Shikoh was executed in 1659, his intellectual contributions, inspired by Mullah Shah's guidance, endured. His Persian translations of Hindu scriptures, particularly the Upanishads, found their way to Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, influencing scholars who sought to understand Indian philosophy. German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer was deeply influenced by Dara's translated Upanishads, seeing in them a vision of spiritual unity. In India, Dara's memory was revived during the colonial period when scholars reassessed Mughal history. Many saw him as a symbol of syncretic culture and religious harmony, contrasting sharply with Aurangzeb's more rigid policies. Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah, as his spiritual guides, thus became revered figures in discussions on India's pluralistic past. Sikh and Mughal interfaith relations. Miyan Mir's friendship with Guru Arjan Dev and his participation in the foundation of the Golden Temple in Amritsar became legendary symbols of Hindu-Muslim-Sikh harmony. Even in later periods of conflict between Mughals and Sikhs, Sikh chroniclers continued to regard Miyan Mir with great respect. His shrine in Lahore still receives Sikh visitors who see him as a saintly figure who transcended religious divisions. This legacy of interfaith harmony continues to resonate in modern times. In both India and Pakistan, Miyan Mir is remembered as a Sufi saint who embodied unity and compassion. Scholars and historians highlight his role as a bridge between communities, emphasizing how his teachings promoted peace in a diverse society. Conclusion: the enduring message of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah. The intertwined lives of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah tell a remarkable story of how spirituality shaped the Mughal court, the Sufi traditions of India, and interfaith relations in South Asia. Despite their reluctance to engage in politics, their influence extended far beyond the confines of their khanqahs. Miyan Mir, with his quiet dignity and profound wisdom, commanded the respect of emperors and commoners alike. His lessons on humility and detachment from worldly power left an indelible mark on those who sought his guidance. His teachings inspired Dara Shikoh's vision of religious harmony, influencing one of the most profound intellectual movements of Mughal India. Mullah Shah, his most devoted disciple, carried this torch forward. His mentorship of Dara and Jahanara ensured that Sufi philosophy remained at the heart of the Mughal elite, even as political forces tried to suppress it. Despite persecution under Aurangzeb, his writings, disciples, and the spiritual network he cultivated ensured that his teachings survived. Their shrines in Lahore, their influence on later Sufis like Mullah Shah, and their role in shaping the spiritual trajectory of the Mughal dynasty ensure that Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah remain figures of lasting significance. In an age of division, their message of unity, selflessness, and devotion to God continues to inspire. The afterlife of a legacy, the impact of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah in later centuries, Sufi influence in Punjab and Kashmir. Though Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah had passed, their spiritual impact resonated across generations. The Qādirī order in Punjab continued to thrive, especially in Lahore, where Miyan Mir's shrine remained a significant pilgrimage center. Despite Aurangzeb's repression of Sufi activity, the Qādirī ethos, centered around mystical devotion and service to humanity, persisted through oral traditions, poetry, and shrine culture. Kashmir, where Mullah Shah had spent his later years, also retained his spiritual imprint. The valley had long been a center of Islamic mysticism, Hindu Shaivism, and Buddhist thought, and Mullah Shah's presence added to this rich tapestry. His influence subtly shaped Kashmiri Sufism, particularly among later Rishi saints, who, like him, combined deep ascetic practices with an emphasis on divine love. Jahanara Begum and the Mughal court's quiet Sufism. Although the Mughal court under Aurangzeb turned increasingly orthodox, there were still members of the royal family who remained aligned with Sufi ideals. Jahanara Begum, despite her brother Dara Shikoh's tragic execution, continued to practice and patronize Sufism. She withdrew from active politics but retained considerable influence over court affairs, ensuring that the Sufi traditions she had embraced under Mullah Shah's guidance were not entirely erased. Jahanara devoted herself to writing, philanthropy, and patronage of Sufi shrines. She played a key role in preserving the shrines of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah, commissioning improvements and ensuring their upkeep. Her own mausoleum in Delhi, a simple open-air tomb within the dargah of Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya, was in keeping with the ideals of humility that she had learned from her Sufi masters. Unlike the grandeur of Mughal tombs, hers was designed to reflect the simplicity of a fakira, a woman devoted to God. Her writings, including Risalah-e-Sahibiyya, served as important texts in Sufi circles. They documented Mullah Shah's teachings, emphasizing his guidance on annihilation of the self, fana, divine unity, tawhid, and mystical love. Through Jahanara's efforts, the influence of her Sufi teachers extended well beyond their lifetime. The Qādirī order and Mullah Shah's poetry, one of the most significant spiritual successors to the teachings of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah, was Mullah Shah, 1680 to 1757, the Punjabi Sufi poet. Though Mullah Shah was formerly associated with a different branch of the Qādirī order, his poetry reflected the very ideals that Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah had championed: love, tolerance, and the rejection of religious formalism. Mullah Shah's verses frequently emphasized unity beyond sectarian divides, echoing Miyan Mir's friendship with Guru Arjan Dev and Mullah Shah's openness toward Hindu and Sikh seekers. He too faced persecution from orthodox authorities but persisted in spreading his message through poetry and music. His famous couplets, which challenged clerical hypocrisy and promoted direct connection with the divine, carry the spirit of the Lahore-based Qādirī saints. Mullah Shah's work became a central pillar of Punjabi Sufi poetry, which continued to shape the spiritual landscape of the region. His verses, often sung in Qawwali gatherings, kept alive the philosophy of divine love and the oneness of all creation, ideas rooted in the teachings of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah. The revival of Dara Shikoh's vision in colonial and modern times. Although Dara Shikoh was largely erased from Mughal historical narratives after Aurangzeb, his works resurfaced in later centuries. European scholars in the 18th and 19th centuries rediscovered his Persian translations of Hindu scriptures, particularly the Upanishads, which influenced philosophers such as Schopenhauer and later Western Indologists. In British India, historians re-evaluated Mughal rulers, and Dara was increasingly seen as a visionary prince who could have created a more harmonious India. With this renewed interest in Dara, the legacy of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah also gained attention as they were recognized as his spiritual mentors. During the Indian freedom movement, figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore spoke of the importance of Dara Shikoh's syncretic vision, linking it to their ideas of interfaith unity. In the post-independence period, Pakistan and India both revisited the history of their Sufi traditions, and Miyan Mir was increasingly regarded as a symbol of peace and tolerance. In Pakistan, where Lahore remains a major spiritual hub, Miyan Mir's shrine remains one of the most revered Sufi sites, and efforts continue to promote his legacy as an advocate of unity. Sikh devotees still visit his dargah, reflecting the lasting impact of his bond with Guru Arjan Dev. Meanwhile, Indian scholars have revived Dara Shikoh's writings, highlighting their significance in understanding Mughal pluralism. This academic resurgence has led to a renewed appreciation of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah, who shaped Dara's spiritual outlook, modern reverence, shrines, music, and popular culture. The shrines of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah in Lahore remain active centers of devotion, drawing pilgrims from across Pakistan and beyond. The annual Urs, death anniversary celebration, is observed with qawwali, recitations of mystical poetry, and free communal meals, langar, a practice rooted in the inclusive spirit of the saints. Contemporary musicians and poets continue to draw inspiration from the themes of divine love and humility that Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah emphasized. In Pakistan, qawwali singers such as Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan and Abida Parveen have performed pieces that reference the spiritual legacies of these Sufi masters. Their message of love over ritualism, unity over sectarianism, continues to resonate with new generations. In Kashmir, where Mullah Shah once meditated, his presence is remembered in folk traditions and oral histories. His connection to Mughal-era Sufism remains a key part of Kashmir's spiritual landscape, especially among scholars and Sufi practitioners. Conclusion: the enduring message of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah, the intertwined lives of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah, tell a powerful story of how spiritual wisdom can transcend political power, how love can bridge religious divides, and how devotion to God can persist despite worldly challenges. Miyan Mir, the humble saint of Lahore, demonstrated that true spiritual authority comes not from proximity to rulers, but from an unwavering connection to the divine and service to humanity. His friendship with Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims alike embodied the Sufi ideal of universal brotherhood, leaving a lasting mark on South Asian spirituality. Mullah Shah, his devoted disciple, furthered this mission. Despite persecution under Aurangzeb, he mentored Dara Shikoh and Jahanara Begum, shaping one of the most profound mystical movements of the Mughal era. His writings, poetry, and philosophical teachings on the unity of existence continued to inspire seekers long after his passing. Their teachings influenced later Sufis like Mullah Shah, whose poetry challenged religious orthodoxy and promoted inner realization over outward rituals. Their ideas resurfaced in Dara Shikoh's translations and philosophical works, which found a global audience centuries later. Their shrines remain sites of pilgrimage, and their names are still spoken with reverence by those who seek wisdom beyond sectarian divides. Even in today's world, where divisions along religious and ideological lines persist, the message of Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah remains profoundly relevant. Their lives remind us that true spirituality is about unity, humility, and seeing the divine in all beings. Their legacy, preserved in poetry, architecture, and the hearts of their followers, continues to illuminate the path for those who seek truth beyond boundaries. Love alone can conquer the world, not swords, nor wealth, nor force. This is the way of the saints. Miyan Mir, Miyan Mir, Mullah Shah, and the inner sound of meditation, the mystical practice of listening to the divine call. Introduction: the Sufi path to inner awakening. Sufism, the mystical dimension of Islam, emphasizes direct communion with God through love, devotion, and spiritual practices. Among the most profound techniques employed by Sufi masters is the practice of listening to the inner sound during meditation, a method that allows seekers to detach from the distractions of the material world and attune themselves to divine vibrations. This esoteric practice was deeply valued by Miyan Mir and his spiritual successor Mullah Shah Badakhshi, two of the most revered Qādirī Sufi saints of Mughal-era India. Both Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah saw inner listening as a key to self-realization, a means to transcend ordinary consciousness and experience the divine directly. Unlike the outward recitations of prayers or rituals, this method involved silent introspection, deep meditation, and attunement to the celestial sound that is always present but remains unheard by those absorbed in the physical world. This practice was particularly significant for them because it aligned with their philosophy of Wahdat al-Wujud, unity of being, the idea that God is immanent in all things and can be directly experienced within. By listening to the divine inner sound, Sawt-e Samadhi, or the eternal sound, the seeker could move beyond intellectual understanding and enter a state of deep spiritual awareness. The concept of the inner sound in Sufism, the belief that divine sound exists within every soul, is a core tenet in many mystical traditions, including Sufism. The Quran itself refers to divine communication in the form of sound and light. The phrase kun fayakun, be and it is, reflects the idea that creation itself was initiated by divine sound, indicating that the universe resonates with this primal vibration. Sufis, particularly those influenced by esoteric teachings, interpret this as a sign that an inner, subtle sound, an echo of that original divine command, exists within every human being. In Sufi practice, this sound manifests as an unstruck melody, anahata nada in Indic traditions, a vibration that emanates from the soul rather than an external source. Many Sufis describe it as a deep hum, the resonance of silence, or the call of the divine. Through meditation and inner focus, the disciple becomes attuned to it, using it as a guide to transcend the ego and merge with the divine presence. For Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah, this inner sound practice was the pinnacle of Sufi meditation. Unlike conventional prayer, which involves words and physical movements, inner listening required total stillness, sincerity, and surrender. It was not about speaking to God, but about hearing his voice within. Miyan Mir's approach to the inner sound, silent remembrance and divine absorption. Miyan Mir, a revered Sufi of the Qādirī order, is often remembered for his extreme humility and simplicity. He rejected material wealth, refused royal patronage, and lived a life devoted to the remembrance of God, dhikr. However, while many Qādirī Sufis practiced loud, vocal dhikr, Miyan Mir emphasized the silent remembrance of God, one that focused on listening rather than speaking. He taught that true remembrance, zikr-e-kafi, was beyond words. Instead of mechanically reciting God's names, he urged seekers to turn inward and listen for the divine vibration already present in the heart. His gatherings were often marked by deep silence, where disciples were encouraged to close their eyes and attune themselves to the sound of divine presence, a mystical vibration that could only be perceived in a state of deep inner peace. This technique was based on the belief that the human heart is not merely a physical organ, but a spiritual receiver, constantly echoing divine frequencies. When a seeker stilled the mind, cut off external distractions, and surrendered completely, they would begin to hear this inner sound, described as a celestial hum, a ringing, or an unbroken melody. Miyan Mir often told his disciples that silence speaks the language of God. He discouraged excessive intellectualization of spirituality and instead encouraged direct experience through deep meditation. He believed that the inner sound was the most direct path to realizing God's omnipresence, as it was always accessible, never distant. Many of his disciples, including Mullah Shah, reported states of ecstatic absorption, wajd, after practicing this technique, where they felt as if they had dissolved into the sound itself, losing all sense of individuality. This was, for Miyan Mir, the highest state of Sufism, to lose oneself in the divine music, to become the song rather than just the listener. Mullah Shah and the inner sound, the art of divine attunement. Mullah Shah, the spiritual successor of Miyan Mir, took this practice even further, developing a detailed method for achieving direct communion with the inner sound. While Miyan Mir provided the foundation, Mullah Shah refined and systematized the practice, teaching it extensively to Dara Shikoh, Jahanara Begum, and other Mughal disciples. For Mullah Shah, the inner sound was not just a mystical experience. It was the very bridge between the physical and spiritual realms. He compared it to a hidden current that flows within every soul, waiting to be discovered. This practice was a way to detach from the body, transcend the senses, and become absorbed in divine ecstasy. He taught that listening to the inner sound required absolute stillness, not just physical stillness, but mental and emotional stillness as well. This involved seclusion, khalwa. The practitioner had to retreat from worldly noise and distractions, ideally sitting alone in a quiet place. Breath control, tanafusi kafi, regulating the breath to slow the body's rhythms, allowing the mind to become more receptive. Intention, niyya, focusing solely on God, setting aside all thoughts of the self. Listening without expectation, the sound does not come through effort, but through surrender. Mullah Shah taught that forcing it only created obstacles. Instead, one had to become completely open. Mullah Shah described this experience as hearing the voice of God through silence. He often referenced Sufi poetry that spoke of the beloved's call being heard in the depths of the heart. He believed that this sound was always present, but human beings were too distracted by external senses to perceive it. Why the inner sound practice was so special? 1. It was a direct experience of the divine. Unlike intellectual study or theological debate, which could only provide an indirect understanding of God, the inner sound was a direct connection to the divine. It required no intermediaries, no rituals, just pure attunement to the soul's frequency. 2. It transcended words and language. Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah valued silence over speech. They knew that words, no matter how poetic, could never fully capture the divine mystery. But the inner sound was universal, beyond language, beyond dogma. It was a sound that could be experienced by anyone, regardless of their religious background. 3. It led to annihilation of the self, fana. The ultimate goal of Sufism is fana, the dissolution of the ego into God. The inner sound was the vehicle that transported the seeker beyond selfhood. When a disciple became completely absorbed in this sound, they lost all sense of identity, merging with the eternal. 4th, it created a state of ecstasy and divine love. Listening to the inner sound produced a feeling of divine intoxication, a joy so profound that worldly pleasures became meaningless. This state, often called wajd, spiritual ecstasy, was highly cherished by Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah, who saw it as proof of true union with God. Conclusion: the timeless practice of inner listening. Miyan Mir and Mullah Shah advocated the practice of listening to the inner sound because it was the purest, most immediate way to experience God. It did not rely on external teachers, books, or rituals. It was something every seeker could access within themselves. Through their teachings, they inspired countless disciples, including Dara Shikoh and Jahanara Begum, to look inward and discover the eternal melody of the soul. This practice remains one of the most profound legacies of Sufism, reminding seekers that the divine is not distant, but always calling, within the silence of their own hearts.